So mom and pop not only are going to lose their home, if they have pensions, they're going to lose their pensions. The reality is that the school districts are bankrupt as a household. Well, 37% of those cannot afford the initial market value as established by the CAD, which means that they will go bankrupt and or they will lose their home.
Breaking news, within the last 24 hours, I've had a viewer email me some incredible information about what's happening behind the scenes with appraisal fraud. And honestly, guys, not only are we going to talk about appraisal fraud, this gentleman, Mitch Wexler, who is the president of Mockingbird Properties, is also going to go into debt-to-income ratio fraud, just how overvalued properties really are around America from a fraud standpoint, a cumulative corruption standpoint. I'm not even going to talk about income, but you guys, this is an incredible video. This is an incredible person. He's giving us golden pieces of the puzzle that have been missing. And you guys, again, this has been in front of my own face this entire time. This is completely impossible to give you guys the full message here in just one video. And without further ado, you guys, I wanted to bring on Mitch to simply get the groundwork started as to what exactly is happening. Mitch Wexler, sir, thank you for your time. How are you today?
Good morning. Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. And real quick, before I let you sing, Mitch, and you have a lot to say, brother, goes so deep. It's, I've been researching all this stuff for 2 years, Mitch, and I'm still having a hard time adjusting to what you have just taught me within the first 24 hours of meeting you. And before I let you sing, I just real quick want to show the viewers, what I'm talking about. What has he taught me? And let me zoom in here, you guys. As a loan officer, one thing that always, blew my mind was how when we pass our mortgage licensing test, it asks us what's the maximum debt to income ratio, being that is 43%. But in the real world, we can actually go up to 50% conventional, 56.99% in FHA. And I was always, wondering, how's that possible? And so you started me down a rabbit hole, Mitch, and to the viewers, this is what I want to tell you guys. Essentially, there was a report done in 2018, and they analyzed how many of these mortgages were actually in violation of qualified mortgage protections. In other words, you guys, affordability fraud. And this is what this says. The affected loans would include loans for which the consumer's debt-to-income ratio is above 43%, or the creditor's method of documenting and verifying income or debt is incompatible with Appendix Q. Now, this is the shocking part. And again, Mitch, I'm ashamed of myself. I'm a loan officer. I can't believe I didn't look at this even sooner. Based only on 2018 data, the Bureau estimates that as a result of general QM, which is qualified mortgage loan definitions, 43% DTI limit, approximately 957,000 loans, which total 16% of all closed-end first lien residential mortgages originated in 2018, which means roughly 16% of the loans that they reviewed in 2018 are in violation of qualified mortgage maximum 43% debt-to-income ratio threshold, which means we're right back in subprime territory. Mitch, can you explain to the viewers what you're doing? Can you explain the lawsuit, the fact that we may be going into depression, how 64% of the population can't afford their homes, 37% of mortgage holders at risk of bankruptcy and foreclosure? Just take it away, brother.
Okay, so the DTI is a ramification of the real problem. So the real problem is that fraud is being committed by the appraisal districts. So then you say, how's fraud being committed? Well, in reality, when they say, an appraisal district says the value of your home in 2024, as an example, went up 40% or 60% in 1 year, there is no math to back that up. That's a straight lie. Whatever they're telling you is a straight lie. Their databases are irretrievably corrupted, and we have all the evidence. Everything I'm saying, all that evidence is readily available. But coming back to your point on the DTI, to give you an idea of how bad this is, the DTI is just the tip of the iceberg. By itself, it doesn't mean anything. However, when you understand what the debt coverage ratio is as established by the federal government, it's 28%. So a homeowner should not have more debt on their house than 28% of what that income will allow. Now you start to get into the real truth of how bad this is. So if it's 28% as established by requirements under the federal government, i.e. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, what does that mean when the real number is closer to 50%? Meaning that it takes 50% of a family's household income to pay a tax based on the value of that home. The reality is they don't have the money. And that's how you get to the 37% of the population. Let's call it households, not population, but households. And 37% of the households means single family homes and multifamily renters. That's a household. Well, 37% of those cannot afford the initial market value as established by the CAD, which means that they will go bankrupt and or they will lose their home. The whole system is set up to defraud the public. So what you're really looking at is a conspiracy to defraud. On a large scale, that's the problem. And that problem runs all the way into Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, the information you were just looking at. And it all stems from one simple fact, which is that the CADs, the central appraisal districts, are not doing appraisals under any definition in law. We have all the evidence to back that up. We have evidence on tape that says we took 60,000 properties outside of the database, put them in Excel, manipulated them, and put them back in the database. For us, myself, my accountant internally, that opened up Pandora's box, and we ran what was called an infection rate spreadsheet. That one statement of 60,000 properties turned into 76% corrupt data in Denton Central Appraisal District. Let's assume that the chief appraiser, when he made that statement, lied. Let's assume that it's 80,000 because we ran the math. That 80,000 number turns into 92% corrupt data. In other words, the database is so irretrievably corrupted, it cannot, under any circumstance, be put back together. When people get their bills on their initial notice of value that says your house is now worth, according to chief appraiser of Denton Central Appraisal District, $514,000, the statement simply isn't true. It's a straight up lie. How do you know that? Well, 67% of the population, based on household income, cannot afford a $514,000 home. 37% of that are going to lose their home because they can't, not only can they not afford it, but the math doesn't work for them under any circumstance. So the idea that, well, we'll keep raising taxes doesn't work because people don't have the money to pay. 37% of your population right now today, household population, doesn't have the money. So where's that money going to come from for these municipalities or taxing entities, school districts, to keep raising more money? The answer is it isn't. It's over. The reality is that the school districts are bankrupt. And how do we know that? Well, we know that because 3 weeks ago in the Community Impact, there was an article on the Louisville Independent School District stating that they had their hand out for $15 million to the federal government. Well, that's an interesting thing because in November of 23, they just got permission from the state to raise $1.7 billion of new bonds. So coming back to what you started this with and looking at the debt ratios, when you understand what's going on here, those tax dollars that are raised are then given to the taxing entities, which are the school districts and municipalities, et cetera. And then they take that money, those cash receipts, tax receipts, and they lever it 20 to 1. Well, okay, so the value of your home is now 40% greater market value than what it really should be based on using legitimate math. If you want to use legitimate math, you can say inflation rate, whatever. But the reality of it is that they're not. They're simply pulling numbers out of thin air and saying, this is the value of your home. Pay it, and if you don't like it, we'll take your home. So they're putting a gun to the head of all the taxpayers. Now,
And Mitch,
this gets much worse when it gets into the bonds.
And I want to go into the bonds, but I want to reiterate some very valuable, information that you just gave us. Essentially, these appraisal districts assess the value of houses. They assess the value of houses so that as consumers, we pay taxes. Those taxes are taken and given revenue for school districts and things like that. You made some comments here that I think that the viewers really need to understand what you're saying. Number one, the school districts are bankrupt, even with the overvaluation happening, even with the elevated revenues happening. You also mentioned that roughly 37% of households right now are in jeopardy of bankruptcy, potentially even foreclosure.
Or
Another
losing.
thing that you mentioned that it was a really big thing, man, is how the data that they're using to value our homes on a state level, a state taxing level, the appraisal district, roughly 76% of that data is corruption, and therefore this is an impossible system to correct. Is that kind of
This is
roundabout what?
Yeah, it's worse than that. So back up. So you said on the state level, it's on the CAD level. So the CADs create the value by pulling numbers out of thin air. They literally do not have any mathematical formulas to back them up. They are in violation of what's called USPAP, which is Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. But this gets so much more worse in that the state comptroller has what's called a property valuation study. And the purpose of the property valuation study is to obtain additional money so that the state comptroller can move money from one school district to another. The problem is that the state comptroller then turns around to the CAD, doesn't matter where the CAD is, it could be Travis County, it could be Denton County, and says, I need more money, go raise the values. There's a problem. The state comptroller has no authority in law whatsoever to insist and set property values. It's not what the property valuation study is there for, and that's not what is allowed. Yet, under the hood, that's exactly what's happening. So we have the evidence that certain communities have been targeted. Pilot Point, Aubrey, Sanger, my subdivision specifically, have been targeted for increase of values. Now, how do we know that there's an increase in values? Well, in 2024, if the average increase across Denton County was 24%, which isn't true, that's also, in other words, they said it, but that's not the number. But on average, the math says if it went up 24%, how do you explain properties that went up 65%? How do you explain retail buildings that went up 8 standard deviations above the mean? And the answer is you can't, but for fraud. So this problem runs all the way to the top. The state comptroller is in this up to his eyeballs. And there is no way around that fact because that property valuation study is being used as a weapon against property owners. That's the reality. And by the way, it's not just LISD that's bankrupt, so is DISD. Because coincidentally, about a week ago or 10 days ago, DISD, Denton Independent School District, had their hand out from the federal government for another $12 million.
Mitch, and correct me if I'm wrong here, man, and I'm still trying to absorb what you're saying. You've given me so many missing pieces. I can't thank you enough for that. I hope we're doing the same for the viewers. It seems like basically everyone's turning a blind eye because they need money. And, as a result of everyone at every level turning a blind eye because, again, they need money to survive, you have what's referred to as a cumulative corruption problem that's just getting worse and worse and worse without any solution in sight. Can you explain to the viewers how this is potentially going to impact mom and pop shops, pension holders? Can you talk about how bad this really is for the bond market and how deep that goes?
Okay, so specific to Denton County, but the same math applies to every county. It doesn't matter if it's Travis or what have you, Brazoria, Johnson. You end up in a situation where the money is levered at the bond level 20 to 1. So if it's $100,000, the bonds will be raised by a taxing entity. So the taxing entity receives 100 grand, they'll lever that up 20 to 1. Well, the problem is we've already discussed that 37% of the population can't even afford to pay their taxes as currently assessed. Therefore, there is no more money available to pay these bonds in the future, but for abject theft. Well, when you think about what is a school district, what are their assets? Well, the assets aren't the buildings. And I know that because I've bought schools and we have torn them down. The asset is the land. Past that, there is no asset at a school district other than its cash tax receipts. Well, if people can't afford to pay those tax cash receipts, then in my world, the definition of bankruptcy is when your liabilities are greater than your assets. The school districts, by definition, are bankrupt. They can keep trying to kick this can down the road, but this will implode. Here's the big problem. Who are the bondholders? They're pension funds. Who supplies the money to the pension funds? Mom and pop. Switch it over to the mortgages. So people have mortgages on their homes. They can't afford the homes. They walk away. The banks take the hit. But if it's a private mortgage lender, who put the money into the private mortgage lender? Mom and pop. Pension funds, mom and pop. So mom and pop not only are going to lose their home, if they have pensions, they're going to lose their pensions. This money is not going to get paid back. There's no math on this planet to be able to justify the ability to pay these loans back. These entities are bankrupt, and if the governments don't get involved, the governments are unlawful. So you hit on a point, which was, why are they doing this? Well, it's because they're getting paid to do this.
Mitch, if I can kind of hone in here, and again, beautiful presentation. These data points are useless. If 76% of the data is corrupt data, we know that it's useless. You have the infection rate spreadsheet at mockingbirdproperties.com. But I wanted to tell the viewers that when I initially talked to you, Mitch, and again, you helped open my eyes, and I admitted this to Mitch as well. I said, Mitch, here's the thing, everyone's turning a blind eye. The teachers collecting the money, the appraisers, the loan officers, all of these people are turning a blind eye. Like, I knew that in my test, it says max 43% DTI, but AUS automated underwriting allows me to go 56.99. So I was like, Mitch, what about, aren't some of these people innocent? Right? Like, maybe they don't understand they're giving a blind eye. Maybe they don't understand the corruption and fraud they're involved in. And will you tell the viewers what you told me, Mitch?
Okay. The idea that these people are innocent is complete nonsense. First of all, ignorance of the law is no excuse. They will tell you, because we've already heard this multiple times in a report as recently as the IAO report that was requested by the chief appraiser in Denton County, that, well, we just need more employees and we need a bigger, newer building in order to fix these problems. No, that's not reality. So they've somewhat admitted they've got problems, but they refuse to articulate them. And it gets much deeper in that. Ignorance of the law, like I said, is not an excuse. However, realize that I stood in front of the board in Denton County in November. I delivered to them 5 binders, 1.5 inch thick, full of evidence. And I guarantee they took those binders and tossed them in the trash. In other words, their intent is 100% shown. If you refuse to understand the law that you are charged with, the boards are charged with adhering to the law. USPAC, Texas Property Tax Code, Texas Constitution, U.S. Constitution of the United States of America. That is their charge. They all signed an oath. The board members, chief appraiser, deputy chief appraisers, ARB, and the RPAs, real property advisors. They all signed an oath to protect and defend both constitutions. They all violated that oath, and that's a third-degree felony, straight up. So you cannot possibly say, well, we just didn't know. I'm sorry, that's your charge. And the bottom line is your actions are putting people's lives in harm's way, right? Mom and pop can't afford and they lose their home. The reality of the situation is this is going to get out of hand. We're here to try and stop it from getting out of hand. Get in front of it before it runs you over.
And Mitch, I want to talk about that. And basically, this is, and we'll do more in depth on this, but this is a copy and paste fraud scheme that's been going on for some time. I really want to talk to you about 2016. I like to talk to my viewers about the double bubble that we're in. And without you even knowing that I was talking about this, you pinned, kind of honed in on 2016. I'll get there in a minute. Will you tell the viewers about the big lawsuit that you filed, that you and your people have filed October of 2023, and what you hope to gain by that lawsuit?
The lawsuit is interesting because where we are is literally asking the appellate court in Fort Worth to declare that the law exists. So initially we went to court, the judge wouldn't let the case roll forward. She didn't want to hear it because this is a political football. And the defense counsel stood up and said, but Your Honor, and by the way, this is on tape, transcript, this is how you and I make our living. He literally said that, and we've got it. So we noticed up the judge one more time and said, you really ought to reconsider this. And so where we are now, it's going to the appellate court, I believe, within the next 60 days. But that's how silly this is. In other words, we're going to win at the appellate court, and the appellate court is going to say, of course the law exists. What the hell is the matter with you? Well, the second they do that, here's the reality. It'll be 5 minutes later, and DCAD will be in breach of what was just awarded. So in other words, we'll go to court. The appellate court will kick it back into the original court. We'll get all the evidence put up on the table. And obviously, we have no idea what the judge is going to do. But the bottom line is the law exists. The bottom line is we've got every stitch of evidence such that there is no way out of the box for them. They have put themselves in this position. They have committed fraud. They have broken USPAP, which is probably the most important thing, because USPAP is it's a governor. So what is USPAP? USPAP is designed to be objective. When they violate USPAP and ignore its existence, they then become subjective. When you become subjective, you now end up in the situation that we've got where your database is absolutely irretrievably corrupt. It's of no value to anybody, and therefore you're stealing. When somebody tells you, which I did, that you are committing fraud, and in the recent cases, we even have RPAs committing perjury, you're going to have a problem. So the idea that they're innocent, not a chance.
And Mitch, before we go in, excuse me, Mitch, before we go into solutions and what happens next, can we go back a little bit and can you tell the viewers how you calculated the 40% overvaluation? Because you came up with that number based on an entirely different way. I've been looking at income. You're looking at fraud. I mean, it's amazing to me how you've been able to put all of this together, and it actually aligns with a lot of what I've been saying. But yet, you're talking about, again, fraud. So it's amazing what you're discovering here. Can you explain to the viewers how you came up with that 40%, and can you talk about 2016 and potentially how you saw a bubble in house values forming as early as 2016?
Okay, so we triangulated the income, which is what you had just mentioned, but we had also triangulated the inflation rate, and we had also triangulated the formulas as required under USPAP. And the average, and they were within 1 or 2 points, percentage points of each other. So the 40%, we started to figure out that there was a problem in 2016 as a result of one of my properties getting hit. It jumped. I think they tried that year for like $1.6 million coming off of $1 million. And I knew that there was a problem. And I knew that they acted like car salesmen. The real estate agent or RPA we were dealing with, he had to go to the back room to try and cut a deal to get it back where the real value was, which was hovering around $1 million at that time. So that, in my mind, said, well, wait a minute. If you're going to act like a car salesman, then what else are you hiding? And then we started to dig in. So year after year after year, we've virtually had to file a lawsuit every single year, and that's a violation of the law. If you look up for the viewers, go and take a good look under the Texas Property Tax Code at 2301E and 2301B. You will be horrified at what you're looking at, because when you've been burned by those taxing authorities, I guarantee they have violated those 2 paragraphs. And I guarantee that's how you ended up losing so much money. And it becomes a big ticket. So watch this for a second. If the value of your home goes up $200,000 over 5 years, okay, you understand that's $5,000 a year over 5 years. You literally wrote a check for $25,000 to a CAD that didn't deserve the money, that has lied to you. That's how bad this math is. And then, of course, it gets worse when you get into the bonds and the mortgages and everything else. It's going to blow to shreds.
And I'm going to do, I think we got a separate video we could do specifically on bonds, pension holders, retirement, school districts. I know we're giving the viewers a lot here, but if I may continue, talking about the 40%, you have and this is on your website, Mockingbird Properties. You have the math, how you came up with the 40%. But I would ask Mitch, and can you talk about, certainly if we lost 40% in value, right? If it went down 40% value, obviously our entire system, in my opinion, is built on the backs of homeowners and the value of their homes. Wouldn't a 40% drop create a depression? How does this end, Mitch?
This ends worse than that. And the reason why, let's assume that the CADs get their act together, which isn't going to happen. It's a bad assumption, but let's follow me for a second. If they said, okay, we'll start backing these values down, you end up in a circular argument because they've created debt loads that still need to be supported. Therefore, they can't back it down. The 40% overvaluation is at a minimum. It's not a maximum. And when you associate the word fraud with what the CADs have done, it's like you realize that the bond market picks up on the CAD values. They say, well, this house must be worth $514,000 because that's what CAD says. Well, problem is it isn't true. So the bond underwriters themselves have in fact not done their own due diligence and have picked up on the values based on what the CADs are saying. And we already know that the CADs aren't adhering to USPAP. Now the dominoes start falling. So the 40% is a minimum. When you associate the word fraud with what's going on into the bond world and it starts backing up, what's the real value of those bonds? 13 cents on the dollar if you're lucky. And so all of these things are connected and there's no way out. See, if you look at what's called a Gaussian channel and standard deviation, and you understand how standard deviation works, in my world of quantitative finance, there's something called smoothing. Well, had they have done smoothing, which is a mathematical formula, which means you would have been telling the truth all the way along, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation and staring down the depth of a double-barrel shotgun. But the reality of it is, because they've been committing fraud at least since 2016, which we can verify, and which is on our website, the cumulative effect of that is that there is no way out. You cannot pay debt back because you'd have to steal every asset that's out there in order to accomplish that task. This is the abject definition of socialism on steroids. And for what it's worth, anybody that thinks that Texas can't go the way of California, you're delusional. I mean, that's where we are. This is exactly why we filed this lawsuit.
Mitch, tell the viewers how what's happening is destroying capitalism, and explain to the viewers how you're a developer in real estate and how you yourself have stopped building. And then I want to talk about how are they getting away with this, but please just start about, what is this doing to capitalism? Can we ever get back to that? Are you no longer building? Why?
I'm not building because why would I buy a piece of land and go through all the brain damage and all the development damage and all the inflation risk and all of the employee risk problems when in fact that's all superseded by the potential of being extorted by a CAD. And there was a certain situation not too long ago in Sherman, Texas, where I was asked to develop a Class A multifamily site, and that city had just implemented impact fees. And I had a very nice but firm conversation. I said, look, I'm a Class A builder. I don't need you, and you need me. And I said, I understand how crass that sounds, but if you think I'm going to pay you for the privilege of coming into your city to build a Class A development and put money in your pocket at the expense of my renters, you would be wrong. So needless to say, we didn't get a deal done, but then since then, we've seen the lawsuit being filed. Why would I, or anybody, a developer, open themselves up to straight up extortion? And that's where we are. This is a criminal conspiracy to defraud. And the extortion side of my comment, just so you understand, I did send a very detailed letter to my attorney outlining that what's happening here falls under RICO. It matches every single one of the 7 criteria to a T. So the one hand of the government doesn't want to say, well, this hand of the government is doing bad. However, the federal government doesn't have any love for the state of Texas, so we'll see where this goes over the long haul.
Mitch, the question is, I want to ask you, how are they getting away with this? So please, from what you've seen, how are they getting away with this? And number 2, are you familiar? Well, first of all, are you familiar with the Chevron doctrine being reversed?
Extremely familiar with the Chevron doctrine, but but before we do that, because your question was, how are they getting away with it?
Take it away, brother.
It's actually kind of simple, and the truth is, they're getting paid. These individual people, be it an ARB member, although they're not paid a lot, in fairness, but the RPAs are paid, the chief appraiser is paid, the deputy chief appraisers are paid, and they get a pension. So they cannot possibly say, well, we didn't know. What they'll say is, well, this is how we were taught. Well, my response to that is, if you were taught to commit murder, does it make it legal? The answer is, of course not. This isn't what you were taught. USPAP is a requirement under your licensing. You violated USPAP, you violated your license, you violated your oath that you signed under the Texas Constitution, and that is a 3rd-degree felony. The box is complete. There is no way out. We're just simply pointing out to the public and eventually to a judge who wants to listen, here are the problems. And you can't go any further because the money isn't there to be had. You have to come up with another solution. Of course, we do know what that solution is, but that's a different topic.
And so, and I want to end on the solution. I hate ending on it's hard not to when now I'm aware of this, I'm having nightmares on this, brother. But, recently the Chevron doctrine was struck down, right? And obviously Chevron doctrine, from my understanding, which is limited, gives these agencies such as central appraisal districts authority to break the Constitution and law, to put it bluntly. Can you explain how the reversal of the Chevron doctrine may help your case?
Okay, so Chevron doctrine was about government overreach, and that law existed up until about 30 days ago. And what you really have here, at the tail end of the day, given all of our evidence, you literally have the state of Texas doing an end run around its own constitution. And under the sovereignty clause of the U.S. Constitution, the state of Texas will lose because what is the overriding factor is the U.S. Constitution. So you end up in a bad situation here where all these participants are automatically deemed guilty. So Chevron deference is gone. What the CADs hide behind is the idea, well, we have immunity. No, you don't. Not on an individual level, not on a state level. And they're so ignorant, they don't even understand what their own insurance coverage is. So they can say, well, this is just the way we were taught. Go ahead, say that in front of a judge. We'll have a field day with it.
Very good, very good. And let's move into a solution, Mitch, which it seems like just preparing for a depression and losing 40% of value. But I want to, before I do that, I want to show the viewers, if you guys are interested in getting more information about this lawsuit, about the evidence that he has, go to his website, Mockingbird Properties. He actually has a public petition. You guys don't have to do a lot of stuff, but if you come here, the body of evidence here, the videos here is just, you guys, this is overwhelming. I mean, the amount of research, Mitch, that you and your team have done is just shocking to me. You guys have videos here. There's links to videos. There's links to the petitions. Mitch, I'm thinking to myself, what are the people that retired, they are planning on retired next year or just retired, their pension, their pensions being destroyed, value being destroyed, entering a depression, the whole banking system, is a fraud. Everything is insolvent. School districts are bankrupt. Is there a solution here?
There is, but you have to break it down to everybody's individual level. So not that I want to be a doomsday type situation, but the math is the math, and they can't get away from it. So taxes have to be paid. This isn't a case that taxes shouldn't be paid. This is a case of fraud being committed on such a mass scale that system must be shut down. There is no way to fix this system. So you can say, to make things quantifiable versus, so it's objective versus subjective, so it's quantifiable. What you would say is, okay, if I buy a house for $500,000, that's the value of that house until I sell the house. If I build a house for $485,000, that's the value of the house until I sell that house. Why? Because under appraisal law, you have a willing buyer and a willing seller. It's irrefutable. It's objective. Now, you would take that to the next level and say, how am I going to get the tax dollars for the school districts? Well, here's the hybrid. The hybrid is fine. Your chocolate bar is going to go up 15 cents. Why? Because that's objective. You know what a chocolate bar costs. You know what a 2x4 costs. You know what a window costs. It goes up by 10 or 15 cents. Objective. What have you just accomplished? You wiped out 80% of the fat that's literally getting paid to have a job right now today that shouldn't have a job. That would include the ARBs. The Denton Central Appraisal District would go from 80 employees down to 10 instantly. Those people who are in the real estate tax consulting business, in reality, wouldn't have a job because everything is now quantifiable. They shouldn't have a job because what are they really doing? They're getting paid a percentage. And by the way, this is built into the numbers of the CADs. CADs know exactly what's going on. Well, we have to cover off this 30% that these people are getting. So they play all sorts of games to settle the values. Here's the problem. You can settle the values till the cows come home. It didn't do anything to fix USPAP. It didn't do anything to stop you from screwing over the public by avoiding USPAP. And until people legitimately say, we're going to put a stop to this, this problem will continue and it will blow up. That's what the math says. I mean, there's no other way. So coming back to what do people do? First thing, if anybody's in a position to eliminate their debt and get away from this, be very wise to do so. Because the banks are in trouble. Everybody that's copying off these CADs. I mean, it's so crazy. Travis CAD, their percentages, they actually copy their percentages off Denton CAD. So it's literally the deaf, dumb, and blind leaving the deaf, dumb, and blind. It's crazy, but that's what's happening. And when you understand that math, it just simply can't go on. It's a question of when it's going to blow up, not if. I mean, at some point, people are going to get pissed off. I mean, do you know the Denton Central Appraisal District installed bulletproof glass? If you weren't doing anything wrong, then why did you install bulletproof glass? Are you trying to start a problem?
It sounds like they created it. It's here no matter what, Mitch, you know?
Exactly.
And so, Mitch, we're at about, 38 minutes. I think this is incredibly powerful first video. To the viewers, please comment below. Let us know in the comment section below what you thought about what Mitch said. Let us know what you thought about the evidence. If you go to Mockingbird Properties, I mean, it's very, very compelling. I really appreciate your time, Mitch. I'll let you go. But before I do, man, is there any final words that you want to say and tell the viewers?
It sounds like things are really bad. Obviously, you have a life, you have your families. That's job one. Everything else, you have to understand what you're getting into when you're dealing with these CADs and understand that it's a fraud. And that's what gives you the abilities to fight it on your own without having to hire attorneys. For the most part, like in my world, if you own commercial property, you're going to have to hire attorneys and you're going to have to go after them individually, as well as going after the CAD. So I ask everybody, go and look at the Texas Property Tax Code. You can type it in online, 2301E and 2301B. And when you read those paragraphs, you will see how you've been screwed. And that's how you deal with the ARBs one-on-one.
All right. And Mitch, again, I hope to have you back here. Overwhelming value. And other than that, guys, that was a lot, Mitch. That was a lot, man. I almost at a loss for words. But if you're out there investing in real estate, we do wish you luck and we hope you win.